Okay, this is exactly where we left off. Remember, we finished our HTML and we've got these cool little blocks. But of course, as you know, if we click on these blocks, nothing happens. And this is what I want us to do right now. So let's get into it. What is the first step we need to do? Well, that's right. We need to include a script tag, don't we? Script tag. And let's build this slowly in steps. Okay, so remember what we're wanting to do. We're wanting to rely on the bubbling effect. The fact that events bubble up through the DOM. So with that said, the first thing we want to do is we want to attach an event listener to our parent element, which in this case is the table. So here we want to define a variable and let's call it table. And we can get this table by accessing it via the getElementById method. We know this, we've been through this many times, and its ID is delegation table. Let's just check that is the ID, delegation table. That's right. What's cool about the text editor is if I highlight it, we can see it's exactly the same spelling and it's going to work, put it that way. So there we go, we've got our table. And now we want to attach an event listener. So attach an event listener. So we access our table object. We then access a method called add event listener. Again, we know this. We want to listen for a click event. And then we want to define our custom event handler function. And let's just call it change color because that's exactly what we're wanting to do. So there we go. How cool is this? We've already started doing it. And you can see when we do it piecemeal, it's not that difficult. The next step is, of course, is we need to define this change color function. And what are we doing here? Remember what's going to happen now. When we click on any single one of those cells within the table, the event's going to bubble to the top, right? And we can prove it because if we console log something has been clicked and we go to our browser, we access the console. Just make this a bit bigger. In fact, let me make it full screen. Let's access our console. And now let's click on, say, the number 1. Something's been clicked. The number 5. Again, something's been clicked. Right? How awesome is this? Cool, but let's continue. Let's go back to our text editor. Let's make this full size now. And now we can start getting into the nitty gritty, right? Because right now we know that something's been clicked, but we don't know what has been clicked. And remember, with this add event listener method, we get given an actual object, an event object. And in order to access that object, we have to put it inside a variable. As I mentioned previously in the course, most commonly we use the letter E. Now we've got this event and we can actually just define it in another variable. Let's just say let target be the event target. And then to prove it to you, we can console log this target out. Then we'll know exactly where this event came from. So let's go back to our browser. Let's clear the console and let's click on this first one. Target is not defined. What have I done wrong? Oh, this is called target. It should be target. So there you go. Simple spelling error. Let's go back to our browser. Let's clear this console and let's click on this first one. And there we go. We are literally picking up this TD element. How awesome is that? Strong one. So we know now we can access the actual item that has triggered that event. So there we go. Let's remove that console. What you might think we have to do now is change the color. But now how do we change the color? Well, there are a few ways we can do it. The easiest way I can think of is to define a class and then just add that class to that item that has been clicked. So let's go to our style sheet quickly. I'll show you what I mean. And what I want to do is I want to again access our delegation table. And now this time what I want to do is I want to add our own custom class to each TD tag. Right? And I want to call that class, I don't know, highlight, because that's what we're wanting to do. We're wanting to highlight the cell a certain color. And of course, what we're wanting to do here is we simply want to change its background color to red. That's all we're wanting to do. So if we go back here to our index, awesome. So we've got our class of highlight, which we know we want to add that class to whatever element triggered the event. How do we add a class? Well, it's very simple. We can access our target, the item that triggered the event. It then has an object called class list. And on that object, there's a method called add. And it's really that simple. We're just adding a class to this element. And the class we want to add, of course, is highlight. Let's save this and go to our browser. There's going to be one major problem with what we've just done. So let me click on number 1, for example, and brilliant, it changes to red. But what is the problem? Can you foresee a big problem here? Well, that's right. If we go and click on another cell, what's going to happen? Well, that's right. That cell's going to go red, but the number 1, the original cell we clicked on, doesn't change. It still stays red. So there's a slight problem with our code, which I want to fix now. We can go back to our code here. I want to delete adding a class list here, and I'll show you why in a second. What I want to do right now is I want to define our own custom function, and you'll see why a bit later. And let's just call this function highlight, and we want to highlight this target, all right? So the next step we're going to have to do is we're going to have to define a function called highlight, and it's going to take a node. In this case, it's actually going to take that element, that target element. And this is kind of where I want us to regulate what item is currently clicked versus the one that's previously clicked. So let me explain. At the very beginning of our script, let's just define an empty variable, and let's call this variable selected element. And initially, let's assign it to a value of null. So what's really cool is that when we start executing this highlight function, we can now introduce an if statement. And what is this if statement going to contain? Well, let's think about what it is we want to do. When we click on one of those TD cells, we want to then define a variable that's assigned to that cell. And then next time something's done, if that variable has a value, we then want to remove that class from that variable. I know it sounds weird, but you're going to see exactly how this works now. So all I'm wanting to do is we're wanting to say if selected element is not equal to null, meaning we've actually previously selected an element. Then what do we want to do? Well, we want to take that selected element. We want to access its class list method. Remember that? But this time we don't want to add, do we? We want to remove that class called highlight. So now this will remove a previously selected element. Is that kind of making sense? All right, that's all good and well, but now what I want to do is we need to assign the new item we've clicked on to the select element variable. So assign the new TD element we've clicked on to the select element variable. And of course, this first if statement is getting rid of the previously selected TD element highlight class. Is that kind of making sense? So we've got rid of the previous one. Now we're wanting to assign the new TD element to this variable. So how do we do that? Well, very simple. We access our selected element, and of course we assign that to the value of node. And then of course what we're wanting to do is we're wanting to access this selected element, its class list method, and now we're wanting to add a class called highlight to the newly selected item. Whew! Is that kind of making sense? I hope so. I really hope so. Let's just go to the browser quickly. See how we go. Let's clear the console and let's click on number 1. So there we go. It's red. Let's click on number 2. Yay! And it's red. Wow. This is amazing, right? Let's click on number 1 again. But if you're really wanting to become a true grandmaster in this stuff, you'll notice this isn't quite perfect. Why? Well, for a few reasons. One is, what happens if we click on this heading of the table? Well, there you go. We can see the heading of the table removes the color on the TD element. So that's a problem, right? And let's just refresh this. Let's click on 1. What happens if I click on in the gap here? In other words, the margins and the paddings between each cell. Well, the same thing's going to happen if the user accidentally does that. The color disappears. And that's not what we want. We only want the color to disappear when you click on another TD element, a table data element. Does that make sense? So there's still something we have to do in order to kind of finish this off and perfect it. Pause the video now and try and figure it out. It really is a quick fix, but it's a bit of a nuance. It's quite tricky.